Annie Duke, one of the most successful poker players of our time, and one of the only women to play at the highest level of the game, has really impacted my discussion with many people in hedge funds, many people I coach in financial services, and just people in general, because she talks about decision making. And in this discussion I have with her, she really talks about her experiences, as a poker player, as an author, as a woman at the highest level of poker, and what she's learned that you can apply to your life about decision making in your personal relationships and your professional relationships. Your story, but I'm just curious. When you think about what are the things about you that drew you to poker, how would you tell folks about that?
Hmm. Yeah. So what are the things that drew me to poker? So I think for me, first of all, I mean, I love the competition. The idea that it was, only by your ability to out decide other people, to try to figure out what made other people tick, to have to stand so completely in other people's shoes, to have to try to figure out how to overcome the weaknesses in the way that you might be approaching the game. Like in particular for me, I just found it really exciting to try to figure out how not to assume I was, I could do things better than other people, which in poker is like, it's really easy to fall into that trap because you can get focused on the ways that you got unlucky so easily so that you could fool yourself into thinking that you were better than you were. And I became like, that became like such a driving force for me, was to try to sort of properly assess where I was sitting so that I could overcome this cool learning problem. Um, and then I have to say, like, I think that I really got something out of being different. Um, Sort of on two levels. One would be societally, right? Because at the time, so I think people have to sort of transport themselves back to the 90s. Because right now, I think that if someone told you they were a poker player, it wouldn't be that different because it's on television and people see it all the time. But people need to remember that it didn't start to become popular on television until, gosh, about 2003.
Oh,
So
you were in the Wild West,
I
literally.
was the Wild West.
Yeah.
I was like, no one knew what you did. I have to say, I got some kind of kick out of, when I would ask people what I did for a living, they would almost always ask me if I was going to Gamblers Anonymous. Like they didn't really understand that what I was doing wasn't gambling. They thought about it in sort of the category of vice. So I was like sort of on the fringes, of like almost like of society. And I kind of like that kind of outlaw feeling.
Why did you like
But
it? Like how? So what was it about being on the edge, being in that novel world that brought you joy or excitement?
yeah, so because I always felt like an outsider. And so I think that I never I never really got angry about that. I just really embraced it.
Let me ask you this. You've talked about feeling comfortable where other people aren't comfortable. Whether that's being different, whether that's being, one of the only women back in the day in poker. How do you do that as a person? What are the skills? What are the ways that you mentally allow yourself to break through that discomfort or tolerate that discomfort where other people aren't able to do it?
Yeah. So I think that one of the things so let me give you an example from poker specifically because I think that this will help. So when I first started playing poker, as you said, this is the other way that I was different. It wasn't that I was at the fringes of society. I myself was at the fringes of poker because only about 3% of professionals play poker. So particularly I started off playing in Montana. Most of the people I were playing with were above 50. I was in my 20s. They were all men. And so here I was like this young woman playing, with these men at the table, and I might add no HR department,
Right.
which actually really made a difference. So and as with any environment that you get, there were plenty of men who were totally lovely, but then there were the not so lovely ones, um, and it was the kind of environment where when you were when people were mistreating you in some way, I mean, I'm mistreating quote unquote, because I guess that's a little bit a matter of opinion, but so when they were taking out the fact that they didn't like being beaten by a girl on you, using some words that start with, I don't know, like C, and you'd sort of look over at the floor person. Champion. Yes, you're such a champion. So yeah. So you'd look over at the floor person who was supposed to be sort of guiding the game in situations where like it seemed obvious to you as an individual, like, hey, you might want to do something about this. This is really bad. And it was just this shrug of it, you're here voluntarily. Nobody's making you be here. If you don't want to be here, you can leave. So this is an example where I have the choice, like, how am I going to deal with the fact that there's some discomfort in this situation for me? Am I going to get up and just leave? And the way that I handled it was basically by really thinking about what's the purpose of this interaction? Like, what are my goals here? And I basically said, well, look, I'm essentially, I mean, I'm really a financial trader here, right? Like I'm trading on these hands. And my goal is to accumulate chips. My goal is not to accumulate friends. It's actually not to accumulate respect. When I think about it, respect would actually be the opposite of what I'd be trying to accumulate, because that's going to cause them to treat me as if I play better, which is bad for you in poker. And I kind of went through this thought experiment of if I had like some kind of big problem in my life, like I was going through a personal crisis or I had a professional question or whatever, this person who's just in a very nasty way propositioned me to, I lost a hand to them and they've propositioned me that if we go across the street to the hotel, they would be happily give me my money back.
Wow.
Would I go to that person to ask for advice? And the answer, of course, is resoundingly no.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, then if that's true, I shouldn't actually really respect their opinion at all, whether they're thinking something good about me or thinking something bad about me, because I'm saying that I wouldn't go to them for help, that their opinion is not useful to me. At which point I kind of got to the point where I said, okay, so I have to sort of keep my eye on what my goal is here. And I need to think about what are the things in the moment that I could control versus what are the things in the long term I'd like to see change. And I just made this very big separation between those two things. So I did a whole bunch of stuff when I was in poker to try to change the acceptance for women. I actually was on the committee, which was a rules committee for the World Series of Poker, where I was really trying to make sure that people would get penalized for the kind of language that had been directed at me quite a bit in my life. And I was successful in doing so along with that group.
So much respect for your work in that area. And also, you say that because I remember reading something about you, or maybe you told me about some of your opinions on the ladies event. And just how in essence, there's some aspects of that just seem demeaning, like it's suggesting that women play differently than men or have a different ability than men.
Yeah, so I think people have varying opinions on whether that was pro women or not, which for me, I always felt like it was very clearly a very feminist stance to take. But though, yeah, that was sort of part of my long-term vision. And what I kind of felt like is low-level tournaments that are women only, I thought were always great. Like that's a way for people to step in a place where it's more comfortable so that they could move into the more uncomfortable spot. But a world championship that's just for women, what is that? It's a game of brains. I really didn't get that. So that was sort of what I was trying to do, sort of on the broader stance of like, let's try to make this more welcoming for women. But in the moment, there was nothing. All I could do was say, okay, this is the situation I'm in. Let me think about the things that I can control. And the things I could control were like, for example, my reaction to that. How much am I brushing that off? That's not to say that I enjoyed that happening or that I thought it was fair, or that I thought that those people were good people or whatever. It's just, I just sort of realized, well, that doesn't have to do with my goal at the table. So I have to be able to figure out a way to soldier on or decide this isn't for me and then quit. And those were the two choices that I had, right? Because I can't change the behavior of the situation, in terms of the situation that I'm in. So I chose the deal with it in the short term, try to execute on the longer term goal.
I really like that for so many reasons. One is because, a lot of times in performance psychology, working with athletes, we're helping people to zoom out, we call it, right? Look at the big picture. Don't get too over focused on one detail, one piece of data, but look at the big picture. And I think what you are demonstrating also is, even though we feel emotions, you didn't give in to them in the moment, right? Like, look, anyone's being called the other C word, not champion, has a right to feel deeply in that moment and react emotionally. If you, and I think the way you described it is great. And then if you look back and you say, like, all right, when I first was called that word, or when I was in that moment, and I'm assuming you experienced rage, intensity. I mean, you're someone I know and respect because you speak your mind. How are you able, if you take me like through the minutia of it, how are you able to kind of calm yourself down in those situations and bring yourself back to a place where you could think?
Yeah. So I think that what you said about zooming out is the key. Is I would say basically what I would say to myself is, I mean, I can explode here and get really pissed off. Am I going to be happy I did that though?
Mm.
In terms of what my own results are, right? Like, do I think my next decision, if I'm seething and screaming at that person, is going to make things better,
Right.
right?
So it's like you were asking one of the things you did, which is interesting, is you asked yourself questions.
Yes.
You say, like, what is it that I really want here?
Yeah.
And is what I'm going to do in line with my goal, or is what I'm hoping to do or wanting to do in line with my eventual goal?
And if I react that way, is it going to improve the next decision I make? Because this is, as I said, one of the things that attracted me to poker is like, it's a battle of decision making, right? So I don't want to allow that person to have that kind of power over me. Because if what they're doing can cause me to lower my decision quality, then they're getting what they want, right? So my best revenge is to not give them back what they're looking for here, right? Now, I just want to be really clear in this, though, that uh, that person could not hire or fire me. That person could not pass me over for a promotion. That person did not determine how much money I was going to make. So when I'm thinking in that situation, like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm relating this to being mistreated in the workplace by a boss or something like that. Like, this was my workplace, but those people had no power over me. And in fact, I was able to view that as a positive, because I realized, like, if that person has so much emotional investment in me that those kinds of words could be coming out of their mouth because I just won a pot against them, then their decision making is not good. And since this is a battle of decision quality, right? Like it's actually good for me that they're behaving that way. So I have to not bring myself down to that level and allow myself to get emotionally invested in this, because then they're going to get what they want, and I'm not going to get what I want out of this interaction, which is, I'm totally fine if they're emotionally, lit up, because that means that the decisions that they make against me are going to be really, really bad, and I can take advantage of those. Now, again, they couldn't deny me a raise. They couldn't fire me. All of those things. So I was in a little bit of a different decision-making situation than other women who might have been having the same kind of thing sent their way. I had more power to disconnect from it.
I think it shows a lot of respect that you're able to note the difference, and for those people that are in that situation. But it's also you're I think giving a map from what you've experienced that may be really helpful to people in that situation. One of the things you talk about, you've written several both entertaining and enlightening books about applying decision making. One is How to Decide. Do you have a copy of that nearby that we could just take? Let's see.
Yes, I do. Right here. Here we go.
How to Decide, and also Thinking in Bets, which is,
I have that too. Wait, hold on.
Yeah, let's see that one too.
Here we go.
Thinking in Bets. One of the things that I've really liked about it is it brings to life, as you know, I coach poker players, I coach people in finance. And one of the things that happens, as you pointed out in these books a lot of times people celebrate good results without an excellent process, right? Yeah. Or they lament bad results that had a great process. And getting clarity around that is something that is really helpful to say, let's drill down and really think about quality decision making. When you think about that, how do you see that operate in your own life, in your personal life?
So actually, so this is pretty interesting that you just said that. I realized there's a connection between how I dealt with this being a woman at the table with this stuff that was going on and what you just talked about, which is um, I think that it's sort of part of that zooming out is getting that second level deep, or at least to the second level deep, which is I'm having an interaction with this person, and there's a way for them to win at the interaction, right? Which is for them to cause me to react the way that I would naturally react. So if I don't react that way, then I get the W. So when it comes to this idea of like how are you treating wins and losses, one of the things that I was super obsessed with in poker was I didn't want to think that I was playing well when I wasn't. This was really important to me because I felt like that was actually the big danger zone. And one of the ways to get to, I think I'm playing really well when I'm not, is both when you win, just to assume like I'm a genius, I must have won because I played really well. But then also, there's a tendency, which you know from coaching people in finance and poker, that when you lose, it's really easy to find the bad luck that intervened. And it was interesting. Like what I would see from my own students was they would tell me a hand, for example, where they lost. Actually, I'll tell you a story that's actually a good example of this. So I remember somebody coming up to me once and complaining to me. They were like, "Oh, I took such a bad beat." And they told me they had the 6-7 of diamonds and that they had made a flush on the turn, and then someone had made a full house on the river. And they wanted to tell me this horrible story. And
they had the best hand on the turn. They were locked a winner, and someone got really lucky with them with the last card.
Yeah, someone hit a 5-1 shot. So the other person would do that 20% of the time. Right. So they were quite upset. And it was true that if you started the hand at the point where they made the flush, this was quite unlucky. And so they were telling me this story, and I stopped and I said, well, wait, can I ask you a question? Like, how did you get involved with the 6-7 of diamonds in the first place? This is an important question because it's quite a weak hand. So I'm not saying that you would never play it. You would. There's plenty of times when it would be totally reasonable to play that hand, but not every time. It's a hand that actually is a very dangerous hand. People get sort of seduced by that hand and tend to play it too often. So here I am. I'm a pro. They're coming up just to tell me a story as a pro, and I'm asking them a very pointed question: how'd you get involved with the hand? And their response to me was, "That's not the point of the question." So, but it was a really important point because probably it wasn't, yes, this bad luck had occurred and you could focus on that, but it was probably a mistake to play the hand in the first place. That would be the most likely scenario, but they didn't really want to hear that from me. And I think that this is actually really important, is that we have this tendency to say, the good stuff, I'm going to look for all the skill in the good stuff so I get to take credit for it. And I'm going to look for all the bad luck in the bad stuff so that in some ways I get to take credit for it. I still get to take credit for the good decision. But I would think about how can I figure out a way to sort of flip that on its head so that I have the second way to get the W, right? And in the same way as one way to get the W against that jerk was to start screaming at them and put them in their place. Another way to get the W, this would be another level deep, would be to just sort of remain calm as much as possible, not show them that it affected me in any way, and then take their money, right? So I chose that way. So with this, what I realized was when I can find mistakes in hands that I won, that's a W. When I can look at a hand that I lost and see all the things that I did wrong so that I could fix them in the future, that was a W for me. And I think that getting to that point of what that requires is to say, do I care more about the future version of me or the present version of me? If I care more about the present version of me, then I'm going to look for ways to figure out that I'm great all the time. And that's going to really interfere with my ability to learn. But if I really care about the future me, then I have to find a way for me to actually find all of the errors. Because if I can't find the errors, then future me isn't going to be a better decision maker, and they're going to be no better than the person I am today.
I love that. So there's so much there, but I think, fundamentally, you're also talking about overcoming this negative bias that we have, that as humans, we evolve with this negative bias. It's what got us here. If we didn't notice what was wrong, we would never survive. So it's really powerful, but that we always look for what's negative in these stories, and that we tell ourselves these stories and we interpret them in ways that aren't helpful. It also makes me think of, when I'm working with first responders, often in certain situations, if there's a good outcome, there's a very, very little written about it. But if there's a bad outcome, oh my God, it's, there's a huge report. And so working to do that in our lives. I also just love what you just said, though. And I really want to ask you a question about it. You said something about, this results-based thinking sometimes leads us to really be focused on the present version of ourselves rather than a future version of ourselves. And it made me think of something that I learned from you that I've used with so many people that I coach. See, this is the thing about sharing your ideas that's so powerful, Annie. Like, you write a book and you're like, okay, cool. It's, people are buying it. But it's really impacting a lot of people. And one of the ideas I've shared with people, it really is. And I'll give you this specific thing. You said something, I don't even think it was a book. I think it was just like you were just talking somewhere and I heard it and I've been using it a lot with a lot of people I coach about time traveling and about how having the exercise of thinking about future versions of yourself can help your present self. I'm wondering, how much do you still do that or use that in your work?
So every single client, it's built into the process. I probably do that every single day of my life.
For yourself?
For myself.
How do you do it for you? Well, sorry, what is it? Because I'm jumping in here. If you could explain it in a couple sentences, what is the time?
So there's a variety of different time traveling exercises. But mostly what it does is it's saying, let me go have a conversation with a future version of myself who's looking back on this moment. So, and thinking about how's that future version of myself going to feel? What is that future version of myself going to look like? And there's a variety of reasons why you might want to do that. One is that it allows you to identify obstacles that might lie in your path in the future much better. So, for example, I could think about if this were to fail, let's imagine it's a year from now and this, whatever I'm doing has failed. Why do I think that happened? That's one thing you can do that would be called a pre-mortem. That allows you to sort of identify obstacles. You can do the opposite, which is imagine it succeeded. Do the same things. You can see the things that you did right. That allows you to create signposts. Another thing, though, is that it's a really good tool when we feel really emotional and we think that we're going to be making emotional decisions in the moment to calm ourselves down. So that would just be, if I imagine myself a week from now looking back on the decisions that I'm making now, do I think I'm going to regret it? So you can imagine if you're in a fight with your spouse or your partner, that you might say, if I continue to really push this in a week, am I going to be looking back on this proud that I didn't just say, can we take a moment and come back and revisit this tomorrow? The answer is almost always going to be no, I would not be proud of that. So that's a tool that you use. That particular tool is one that you use in poker all the time, right? It's just to think like it's sort of what I was doing with, if I allow these people to affect me, do I think I'm going to make good decisions in the future? And the answer is usually no. So it's a way to control sort of emotional responses. It's a way to see where your decisions might go wrong or the reasons that you might fail, such that you might be able to do something about it beforehand. And so you can use this in big and small ways. So as an example, like I think, I remember my husband once watching me on the phone with a very frustrating customer service agent. And there wasn't one moment where my voice broke. And I got off the phone. He said, I could never do that. Like, why, how did you do that? And I said, well, because I'm thinking about what am I looking for? Like, what does future me want as a goal of this conversation? And I'm actually having that conversation in my head because trust me, I'm getting mad. Right. And I'm like, if I start yelling at this person, is this going to help me is future me going to get my way more of the time? And the answer is no, I'm going to get my way less of the time.
It's such a powerful example. And, I think that where people struggle in my experience and where you succeed is being able to get to that technique. So there's this bridge, right, where you have to have a correction. Right. You have to have some learning process, right? So I think you talked about it as sort of asking yourself a question to get there.
Yeah.
Where I think the work becomes challenging is to remember that, right? To be able to shift your behavior in the moment, right? And kind of get to that technique.
Yeah. So one of the things that you'll find in how to decide is that I've got wrap-ups and checklists at the end of each chapter. So how to decide just has tons of these decision tools in it. And then at the end of each chapter, whether it's a chapter on resulting or a chapter on the inside versus outside view or counterfactual thinking or whatever, it's got checklists. And I'm just a big fan of these checklists. So For me, I can see that situation. I'm familiar with it, and I have a checklist of things that I'm supposed to do in those spots. So this kind of time travel has become quite automatic for me because it's part of my checklist as I'm trying to decide what to do. So automatic, in fact, that like when I would be disciplining my children in some way, like they'd be really, they would have, like all kids, I went away for the weekend and it turned out there was a big party at my house. And now they're grounded and they're kind of pissed off about it. It's so part of my checklist that I would say to them, you are going to be so happy when you're 40 and you're at the Thanksgiving table and you get to tell your kids about what grandma did. Like, and I'd be telling this when they were like,
you're like time traveling for them.
I'm time traveling for them.
Yeah.
Where I'm saying, like, imagine how great this is going to be at Thanksgiving in 20 years.
That's so beyond awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that the time traveling thing has been personally helpful to me in helping other people, but also for myself. That I think we overvalue the present moment, whether it's a parenting thing or whether it's you're coaching someone in the game or whatever it is. And I what I notice in coaching people in finance or business or in poker is people get really bent out of shape by variance. They really get bent out of the shape. It's hard in the moment. And I think time traveling can really help people. So if you hit that, like you're, a big favorite to win a bet, whatever it is, on betting on a name in finance or, in a big poker hand and you lose, to be able to say, like, how am I going to feel about this tomorrow? How am I going to feel about this in a day?
So I think there's two things so there were two things that were on my checklist in that situation. One was I would immediately start thinking of all the beats that I had put on other people. And I also had because by the way, trust me, I've had jacks against aces before. I had a very famous hand where I had ace 10 against aces and I won the hand and ended up winning the tournament. So I'll just sort of start ticking those off in my head as well, which is helpful to understand that I've been on the other side of the equation. And then also to remind myself that if I'm a good player, I'm going to be on the bad side of that equation more often than other people will. And so I had some of those things that were sort of I would sort of start ticking off in my head. But this idea of like, how are you thinking about it in the context of how much it's going to matter in the future, I think is so incredibly important. So in how to decide, actually, I have a tool which is called the happiness test in there, which is whether it's because you're getting emotionally bent out of shape or you just can't decide, right? We've seen those people who have like horrible analysis paralysis over a restaurant menu, right? And they're like asking the wait staff and everybody at the table, and then the wait staff comes over and they're like, come to me last. And the tool that I have in there is to say,
most complicated is if you end up at dinner with two come to me last people.
Oh my gosh, then what do you do? Exactly. Well, that would actually start to bend time and space in the world.
Exactly. And you're both time traveling into some other future restaurant.
That's right. So there's all sorts of situations like this where I think that what's getting us into this horrible paralysis is this present bias, which is we're imagining the dish coming and being awful and that we're going to feel like it was a mistake that's resulting. We're going to feel like it's a mistake and we're going to be sad, right? Like the same thing, like something that can hang somebody up in poker in not making a really aggressive bet is that they're imagining in the wake of it, what if it goes wrong and I'm going to be so sad I lost this money. So it's like you're right 2 seconds in the future, which is not far enough to travel. Instead, what you have to say is, let's imagine it goes horribly. Let's imagine that you're deciding between the chicken and the fish is like horrible. And that's what you decided to get. It's awful. So it's a year from now, Fader, a year from now. And I see you and I say, remember when we had the meal a year ago, you had that horrible fish. How much did that affect your happiness today?
Absolutely zero.
How about if I catch you in a month?
Still zero.
How about if I get you in a week?
Well, in a week, I mean, if it was some really impressive fish, it might touch the week.
Maybe, yeah, maybe, but not too much. So I'm assuming no food poisoning. So what this tells you is that this decision that people get so hung up on, and by the way, people spend about 14 minutes on a menu. That's at the average. When you actually start doing this time travel, you realize it doesn't matter at all. This is something I call the happiness test. Happiness is a proxy for am I going to reach my goals. So like you could imagine if you lose a trade or you lose a poker hand, yeah, you're sad. But if you just take a second and say, I'm imagining my P&L in a year. Do I think that this one loss is going to have any effect whatsoever on that P&L? The answer is, of course, no, because it's an expected value game. There's volatility. What are you going to do?
Totally. I mean, I love this. I love that part of what you write about also because I'm the kind of person that I just love life so much. And I feel
Me
like it's
too.
such a blessing.
I'm with you.
I love
How
it.
exciting is
Even
it?
with all the crazy stuff that
Yeah.
happens, I mean, it's just such a blessing. I can't even believe it. And I always think like, man, I mean, I could have nothing against like ladybugs and ants, but I could have ended up there. And like, I've got this amazing life. So, when I think about all that, I sometimes what I get caught up in is, God, I want to maximize every freaking fish decision I make. Like I want to, like I want to make sure that every time, like I actually in my life I weigh, all right, should I have these 15 minutes. What's going to be the best 15 minutes I can get? And I think a lot of what you're talking about helps to resolve that. Actually, one of the things I do is I've applied game theory to my restaurant ordering. So when I go in, I just sometimes what I do is I just look. If it's odd, I go for the top choice. If it's even, I go to the bottom choice.
So that's so great because so I love that. So let me tell you why I love that. Because what I actually recommend is that you use the menu strategy for choosing, which is once something, just think about it, everything is a thresholding problem, right? Okay, it's met my threshold, meaning it's not for me, it's not eggplant. I don't like that. I'm also a vegan, so it's also doesn't have meat and dairy, whatever. So it's not eggplant, and it also meets my requirement of being vegan. So I think that this is something that I would like, which is going to be several things on the menu. So once it's met that threshold, go odd or even. I don't care. Flip a coin. Go with your gut. Just whatever. Just choose. And what ends up happening is that we actually do quite the opposite, which is so when two things meet our threshold, now what that means is that they're super close. And then we're trying to somehow try to get quote unquote the right answer by parsing those apart. And here's the deal. First of all, you do not have the cognitive acuity to parse those apart because you're not omniscient. So I assume you've never tasted those dishes. So you have to go with your best guess anyway. But even if you did have the cognitive acuity to do that, to your point about are you like maximizing every single restaurant decision, you could be spending that time doing something that would give you a lot more happiness. Like, I don't know, talking to the people that you're at the restaurant with, going and finding other opportunities that would make your life amazing. And this, if you can imagine, if this is a problem when you're just talking about chicken or fish decisions, imagine when you get into things that do actually have quite a bit of impact. Like, in the before times, I wanted to go to Paris or Rome. And which are you going to choose between? Where if we do that time traveling exercise and I say, hey, you had a crappy European vacation and I see you a year from now, probably did impact your happiness. But so what will happen is when we've got it narrowed down to those choices that have met the threshold, these decisions feel very hard because we know that they're going to have a lot of impact, but it becomes the same problem. That the fact that it's hard means that they're so close because they've gone past the threshold to which you would think they would be okay, that spending extra time trying to decide between the two is useless time. You're not going to really get there. You're not going to get the answer. So there you should also go odd or even or flip a coin or whatever. And I think that if people can get into that mindset, that's actually going to allow you to allocate your time to the stuff that matters, which is finding the things you're going to win to, not worrying about small, tiny differences in how much you might win to it.
I love that. I love that. Because, I mean, for me, one of the biggest values is how do you find joy? And if you're not really thinking about making decisions that help you to prioritize, that give you a joy dense diet, like how can you do it? And so much of that is, as you're pointing out, the mechanics. In my belief, we live in an unfair world, a world where different people are treated differently based on their gender, their ethnic background, their race in particular. And that, a lot of that has to do with decision making. It has to do with stereotyping. I'm curious about when you think about your work of decision making, how that could help inform people who are trying to do better and making decisions about other people and to be fair in their assessment of people. In other words, my belief is everybody's racist to some extent. How do people, in your mind, begin to correct their thinking about other people?
The other way, though, to get to the world independent of your own beliefs is to get somebody else's perspective on the situation. And when I'm talking about somebody else's perspective on the situation, I'm talking about somebody who you have not communicated your own opinion to. So you have given them the facts on the ground, and then you have asked them how you view your situation, because two people can be looking at the same data. They can be looking at the same person. They could be looking at the same promotion or hiring decision, and they can come to very different conclusions about it. So colliding with those other points of view is very helpful for disciplining the things that you don't even know are biasing your own decisions, because you get their perspective. Now, we can take that one step further and say this is actually the best argument for diversity on a team. Because when you have a diversity on a team, that is a proxy for cognitive diversity. And the best thing we can do to improve our decision making is to recruit cognitive diversity among the people that we're interacting with. So we're getting as many different perspectives on situations as possible. That's going to get us closest to what is actually true of the world, to what we would call ground truth. So when we start thinking about how important the outside view is, it's not just a way to help to discipline whatever bias you're bringing to the table, but it is an argument for diversity on your team.
I think that's a brilliant argument for diversity, and also a brilliant argument for an actionable goal, forcing ourselves to ask for opinions from others that are different from us, to challenge our thinking process. Of all the great stories that Annie talked about, I think one of the ones that impacted me the most was this story about being an early poker player, a female poker player, one of the only female poker players, and having these really offensive experiences about being propositioned, playing poker and some guy saying to her, "Oh, if you want your money back, you can come to the hotel with me." And I think, while as offensive and repulsive as that is, I was inspired by how she responded to that. And the idea of when someone is offensive, even if it's someone who, is your boss or has some power over you or something like that, to ask ourselves, what she does is she asks herself, would I take advice from that person? And if the answer is no, then to be able to just really basically throw out what they say. I think that's really powerful, that idea of, asking ourselves, would I take advice from this person? Is this someone that I would respect? And if not, it's easier to ignore them. There were so many things that and techniques that she has told me about that I utilize for myself and with clients I coach. For example, this time traveling idea has been so powerful for me. The idea that, what will my future self think about this? Will my future self care what I order for dinner? Will they care about this money lost or money gained? What will my future self think about that? And even just closing my eyes for a moment when I'm struggling with something and thinking, sometimes I actually think, what will my 80-year-old self think? It really puts into perspective. Like sitting there in my rocking chair, hopefully I'm in good health and I can look back on my life now and think, like, how will I feel about this relationship? How will I feel about this project? It put things in perspective. And I think one of the most powerful ways to re-envision life and really find greatness, and even in trying times, is to gain perspective. And that's what that time traveling technique does. So I hope you have a chance to try it out and to use it. And I hope you check out some of the other content that we have in this season of The Great Parts. We have a great interview with the legend John Bon Jovi, who talks about how the stories that he tells himself and how that helps him both with tough times and times of plenty. The interview with Brandon Marshall, the former NFL star, who talks about how he's overcome adversity in his life. And then Ryan Holiday, my friend, who's a prolific author, writing about applying philosophy like Stoicism to your everyday life. So check it out. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next episode of All the Great Parts.